The first memory I have of my mother is of her leaving. I was only 7 years old when Olivia made her choice. She walked out the door, holding my stepfather's hand, taking with her her suitcases and a promise to return. I sat in the living room, clutching my disheveled doll in my lap, tears in my eyes, watching the scene as if I were in a movie where the protagonist is abandoned without explanation. "I'll come back for you, my love," she said, kneeling to cup my face in her hands. "Mommy loves you." But time passed and she never came back. My grandmother, Abigail, took my hand that day and never let go. She was the one who dried my tears, made my breakfast, and taught me how to tie my shoelaces when no one else seemed to care. But back then, I didn't understand any of it. All I knew was that my mother had chosen another life over me. The day Olivia left is etched into my memory like a scar that never fully fades. The apartment smelled of bitter coffee and rain hitting the sidewalk. The sky was gray, as if it, too, knew what was about to happen. "You can stay with Grandma for a while, sweetheart. It'll be fun, won't it?" she said with a smile, but it was a strange, forced smile. The man standing beside her, my stepfather, said nothing. He just held her hand tightly and looked at me with a cold indifference. I never liked him. Maybe because, deep down, I knew he was the one taking my mother away from me. Abigail, my grandmother, watched everything in silence. She was a strong woman, but that day, her eyes carried a weight I couldn't understand. When the door closed, leaving only the echo of my mother's footsteps in the hallway, I looked up at my grandmother and asked, "Is she coming back?" Abigail sighed, tucking a stray gray hair behind her ear, before pulling me into a tight embrace. "One day, my dear. One day." But days turned into months. Months turned into years. And my mother never came back. At first, I cried every night. I wondered if I had done something wrong, if she had left because I wasn't good enough. But Abigail was always there. She taught me how to bake chocolate chip cookies on rainy afternoons and took me to the park on sunny Sundays. She told me old stories from her youth, always emphasizing how strong the women in our family were. "You're strong too, Alice," she would say as she braided my hair before bed. "One day, you'll see it for yourself." I wanted to believe her, but a part of me always held on to the hope that one day my mother would show up at the door, eyes full of regret, arms open to take me back. Years later, when I was almost 18, something happened that reopened the wounds I had tried so hard to forget. A letter arrived in the mail. It was from Olivia. Abigail froze as she opened the envelope, as if she were holding a bomb about to explode. I, on the other hand, felt a wave of conflicting emotions, anger, anxiety, hope. After all these years, what could my mother possibly have to say? My mother's letter sat on the kitchen table for hours before I found the courage to touch it. The white envelope, with my name scrawled in hurried handwriting, seemed to radiate an almost ghostly presence. Abigail opened it first, read it silently, then set it aside without showing any emotion. "Do you want to read it?" she asked, without pressuring me. Did I? I wasn't sure. Part of me longed for answers, but another part feared that my mother's words would reopen wounds I had spent years trying to ignore. But in the end, I picked up the paper with trembling hands and began to read. "My dear Alice, I know I have no right to ask anything of you after all this time, but I need you to know that I never stopped thinking about you. I know I caused you pain, and words may not be enough to mend the past. But I would like to see you. Please, give me a chance to explain. I'm back in town, and I hope we can meet. With love, Mom." The word "Mom" at the end of the letter made my throat tighten. Mom. The title she abandoned along with me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to absorb it all. She wanted to see me? After all these years? Why? "What are you going to do?" Abigail asked, with the kind of calm that only comes with age. I didn't know. But one thing was certain, that letter would change everything. My teenage years were a time of learning and struggle. Abigail was a tough but fair woman. She never let me drown in self-pity. "The world doesn't stop for your pain, Alice," she would say whenever she caught me dwelling on the past. "You can choose to be a victim, or you can move forward." So, I moved forward. I threw myself into my studies, looking for an escape in education. I became a top student, excelling in literature and writing. I dreamed of studying journalism and, maybe one day, telling stories that mattered. But no matter how hard I tried, my mother was still a shadow hovering over me. I saw mothers picking up their children from school and felt envious. I saw families gathered for dinner and wondered what life would have been like if Olivia had stayed. But whenever the pain threatened to swallow me whole, Abigail was there. She held my hand. She made my favorite tea. She reminded me that I wasn't alone. And then, years later, my mother reappeared. On the day we were supposed to meet, I went to the cafe where Olivia said she would be waiting. My feet felt impossibly heavy. My heart pounded so hard I was afraid people around me could hear it. When I walked in, I saw a woman sitting at a table in the corner. She looked older, with subtle lines around her eyes and a gaze weighed down by something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe. When our eyes met, she gave me a hesitant smile. Alice. I sat down across from her, unsure of what to say. After all these years, how do you even begin this conversation? She looked at me, studying my face as if trying to make up for lost time. You're so beautiful, so grown up. I crossed my arms, trying to shield myself from my own vulnerability. What do you want, Olivia? I used her name on purpose. I wanted her to feel the weight of her absence. She blinked, as if the words had hurt her, but she quickly let out a sigh. I made a lot of mistakes. I know I left you, and there's no excuse for that. Then why did you do it? My voice came out louder than I intended. Why did you abandon me? She bit her lip, lowering her gaze. Because I thought I was doing the right thing. I let out a humorless laugh. Leaving me was the right thing? Your stepfather, he wasn't a good man, Alice. At the time, I thought I was protecting you by leaving you with your grandmother. A cold chill ran through me. What do you mean by that? Olivia hesitated, as if there was something she still wasn't telling me. He was controlling. Manipulative. At first, I thought I was in love, but, over time, I realized he wanted to isolate me from everything, even you. Anger and confusion swirled inside me. So you chose him. Even knowing that, you still left with him. I was weak, she admitted. And I regret it every single day. I fell silent, feeling a storm raging inside me. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to forgive her. But the pain of abandonment doesn't just disappear with words. Olivia took a deep breath and placed her hand over mine on the table. I came back because I want to make up for lost time. I know I can't change the past, but maybe we can build a future. My instinct was to pull my hand away. But something inside me hesitated. What would I do? I should have walked away. After everything my mother put me through, after all the years of silence, I should have gotten up from that table and told her it was too late. But I stayed. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe I just wanted to understand. How did you find me? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Olivia let out a small sigh and lowered her gaze to her cup of coffee. Your grandmother never stopped sending me updates. My body went rigid. What? She nodded. Abigail always knew where I was. She wrote me letters from time to time. She told me how you were growing up, about your grades in school, your dreams. My heart pounded. You're telling me Grandma knew where you were this whole time? Yes, Olivia confirmed, looking straight at me. But she never asked me to come back. My mind went blank. Abigail knew? My grandmother, the only person I had ever truly trusted, the one who had been by my side all these years, knew where my mother was and never told me? Why? Olivia continued, I'm not telling you this to turn you against her, Alice. I know your grandmother was your real mother all these years. But she believed I didn't deserve to have you back after what I did. I closed my eyes, trying to contain the flood of emotions. Abigail protected me. She took care of me. She gave me a life. But she also kept the truth from me. I stood up from the table, my head spinning. I need to go. Alice, please. But I was already leaving. I got home with my heart racing. I found Abigail in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove. She smiled when she saw me. How did it go? She asked, her calmness only making me angrier. I threw my bag onto the table. You knew. She stopped stirring. Knew what? You knew where my mother was this whole time. You knew and never told me. Her expression grew heavy. Alice. Why, Grandma? Why did you lie to me? She sighed, turning off the stove and sitting at the table. Because I didn't want you to get hurt more than you already had. I sat across from her, my eyes burning with a mix of anger and confusion. Don't you think that was my choice to make? She lowered her gaze. Maybe. But I saw your pain, Alice. I saw how you cried at night when you thought I couldn't hear. I saw how you tried to be strong, but carried an emptiness inside you. And I couldn't let your mother come in and out of your life again. I understood. And at the same time, I didn't understand at all. And now? I asked. Now she wants to know me. She wants to fix things. Abigail looked at me with a mix of sadness and acceptance. That's your decision to make, sweetheart. But just remember one thing, you don't have to forgive her to move on. The days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking. About my mother. About my grandmother. About everything that had been kept from me. Then, I got another message from Olivia. I need to talk to you. There's something you need to know. It's important. Something inside me told me to ignore her. But curiosity won. We met at the same cafe. This time, her expression was more tense. What is it? I asked, sitting down. She hesitated for a moment, then said, Your stepfather is dead. I froze. What? He died a few months ago. A car accident. That's when I decided to come back. My heart started beating faster. What does that have to do with me? She took a deep breath and then dropped the bomb. He left me money. A lot of money. But in his will, there was something surprising. I blinked, confused. What? He left part of the inheritance to you. My mind went blank. That doesn't make any sense. He didn't even like me. Exactly, Olivia agreed. And that's why I'm suspicious. A chill ran down my spine. What are you trying to say? She looked straight into my eyes and said, I think your grandmother is hiding more secrets than we ever imagined. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was echoing in my ears. What was my grandmother hiding? Why would my stepfather, a man who had never shown me any affection, leave me money? I wanted answers. And there was only one person who could give them to me, Abigail. I left the cafe without saying another word to Olivia. I took the first bus home, my thoughts spinning in circles. When I arrived, Abigail was sitting in her favorite armchair, knitting as if nothing was happening. But when she saw me, her expression changed. She knew. Do you want to tell me what's going on? My voice was steady, but my hands were sweating. She set the knitting down on her lap and sighed. You spoke to your mother again, didn't you? Yes. And she told me about the inheritance. Abigail's face tensed. Alice. Why did he leave me money, Grandma? She looked away. Because he was your father. Time stopped. The air was sucked out of the room. What? My grandmother closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering the strength to say it out loud. Your stepfather, he was your biological father, Alice. I felt my stomach drop. That can't be true. My mother always told me my father was a man who abandoned her before I was born. Abigail took a deep breath. That was a lie your mother told to protect you. The world was spinning around me. You knew? I always knew. My legs went weak, and I sank onto the couch. How is that possible? He never even liked me. He never wanted to be a father, Abigail said, her voice heavy with sorrow. He manipulated your mother, made her believe it was love. But when you were born, he didn't want the responsibility. And that's when everything started falling apart. I could barely breathe. Then why did she stay with him later? Why did she leave with him and abandon me? Abigail hesitated before answering. Because he threatened both of you. My eyes widened. What do you mean, threatened? He told Olivia that if she tried to leave and take you with her, he would do something terrible. Your mother was terrified. She thought the only way to keep you safe was to leave you with me. My mind was spinning. So my mother hadn't abandoned me because she didn't love me. She had abandoned me because she thought she was saving me. And you never told me any of this? Abigail took my hands in hers, her tired eyes filled with emotion. Because I thought the past couldn't hurt you if you didn't know about it. I thought I was protecting you from the truth. The tears started falling before I could stop them. So my whole life was built on a lie. My grandmother squeezed my hands. No, my dear. Your life was built on strength. On your resilience. I didn't know what to feel. Anger. Relief. Sadness. Confusion. All at once. But one thing was certain, I would never be the same again. In the days that followed, I allowed myself to feel everything. I cried for the time I had lost. I cried for growing up without knowing the truth. But little by little, I realized something important. I now had the power to choose my own path. I decided to accept the inheritance. Not because I wanted the money, but because it was my right. It was the last thing my father, a man who never wanted me, left behind. And I would turn it into something good. With that money, I enrolled in journalism school. Olivia tried to reconnect, and for the first time, I let her try. We weren't okay yet, but maybe one day, we would be. Abigail remained my rock. Even though she had kept the truth from me, I knew everything she did was out of love. And I loved her. Life doesn't always give us the answers we want. But sometimes, the truth is the first step toward freedom. And I was finally free.